The story begins with events that took place at the Adelhart estate. Duke Cassius Adelhart looked sternly at his interlocutor. The man looked at the woman as if she were his greatest enemy. This greatly pleased the young lady, as she considered the Duke to be completely right. The man was eager to know what had prompted the young lady to come to him unannounced. Adelia already had a plan that she wanted to at least try to put into action. The woman forced herself to collect her thoughts because she felt completely distracted in the Duke's presence. She raised her charming gaze to the man and said firmly that she wanted to break off the planned engagement. The Duke was completely baffled. He couldn't understand what the young lady was talking about. It was absurd. The woman stammered, trying to explain her point of view to Cassius, because neither of them wanted this fictitious marriage. The events took place a week ago. A car accident destroyed Soyeon Han's life. The young lady's mangled body lay lifeless in the middle of the road. Passers-by tried to give her first aid. When Soyeon Han came to, she realized that she was in a completely different world. It was obvious to the naked eye. The girl was in utter despair and could not believe that something like this could happen to her. Reborn in a fantasy world, as usually happens in books, the woman became none other than Adelia Barnine. This lady, having married Cassius, became Lucius's stepmother. The woman became a terribly insidious and cruel stepmother. Like her stepson, Adelia was an illegitimate child. But unlike her, everyone in the duchy loved Lucius and cared for him. Adelia was consumed by jealousy and envy. The woman wanted with all her heart that the boy would have to go through the same pain she had once endured. Adelia physically abused Lucius. When the cruel lady was caught red-handed, she was thrown out onto the street, where she caught a disease. Eventually, the pitiful woman met her death in a monastery. According to the original story, readers were delighted when the thief got what she deserved. Soon, Khan was one of those readers. But the woman couldn't understand why she ended up in Adelia's body, since she wasn't the only commentator on the novel. The young lady was determined to change the events of the book. Since Adelia had not yet married Cassius at that time, she had a chance to end everything quickly and painlessly. In order to survive, the young lady was willing to be nice to little Lucius. Adelia was already painting pictures in her mind of how she would change the course of events. She did not want to be a cruel character who would ultimately die in agony. The woman simply wanted to be happy in her new life. But the problem was the Duke. The young lady did not want to marry someone who despised her. She did not need his wealth because she understood that her life would turn into hell and horror. After carefully considering her actions, Adelia finally decided to break off all relations with Cassius because she wanted to build her own life. The young lady wanted too much to change the course of the original story. The moment came for a cold conversation with Cassius. The Duke could not understand whether this was Adelia's desire or the whim of Count Barney. The man was outraged by such a sudden conversation, which was completely out of his plans. The woman explained that it was her personal desire and that her father was completely unaware of it. After listening to Adelia, the Duke said that the conversation was over. Angered, Cassius rose from his chair, pretending that the conversation had never taken place. Confused, Adelia tried to stop her husband. She even grabbed his arm. Enraged, Cassius stopped and turned abruptly. He looked at the defenseless lady with a terrifying gaze. Lowering her eyes, the woman asked Cassius why he had agreed to their engagement. She was sure that her father had offered marriage in exchange for her silence. Technically, it was more like a threat. Cassius couldn't understand why a woman who understood everything so well was trying to break off the engagement. But, unexpectedly, Adelia was willing to give her husband the information he needed in exchange for him breaking off the engagement. The Duke had no idea where the young lady had obtained the information. The woman could not admit that she had read about it in a book. She lowered her eyes and said she could not tell Cassius about it. But Ibelia assured the Duke that there had been no leak of information. The woman added that only she and her father knew the truth. She raised her confident gaze to Cassius and waited for some kind of response. Ibelia's embarrassed look gradually became more and more confident, and she still waited for the Duke's answer. But Cassius was in no hurry to respond and promised to think about it. Then the man asked the woman to leave. Ibelia thought that despite the tension between them, the Duke should have walked her to the exit, but he did not. Suddenly, someone called out to Lady Barnine. It was a boy named Lucius. The child looked at Ibelia with his cute eyes. The boy asked the woman to keep him company and have tea with him. Then Lady Barnine remembered that it was Lucius. The maid who was walking beside the boy gently reminded him that he should first greet the lady before starting a conversation. Lucius blushed a little and nodded. The little boy muttered that he was glad to meet her. Ibelia laughed brightly and immediately felt affection for the child. In reality, the boy seemed very cute to her. The woman politely greeted the young Mr. Adelhart. Lucius was quite surprised, as no one had ever greeted him like that before. The boy began to examine the woman and noted that she was not at all like everyone else. He was quite surprised that such a beautiful lady knew him. In response, Ibelia just laughed and said that the boy looked very much like his father and was, in fact, his spitting image. The conversation was friendly and polite. To make the boy feel comfortable, the woman introduced herself as Ibelia Barney. However, the young lady was lost in thought. She was not entirely sure that she should agree to tea. It occurred to the lady that if she agreed, Lucius would begin to hope that she would become his stepmother. After quickly considering the matter, Ibelia apologized to the young gentleman and said that she was engaged and had to decline his offer. The boy looked at the woman with incomprehension. The woman was sure that this was a better decision than giving the boy false hope before breaking off his engagement with his father. Lucius was embarrassed. He apologized for being rude. Ibelia, so as not to upset the boy, said that it was her fault. Choosing very gentle and careful words, the woman explained that she had to leave and said goodbye to the child. Lucius Adelhart was the illegitimate son of Cassius Adelhart. In the original novel, he was cold-blooded, like his father. He was a man capable of killing without a shred of remorse. This is how Lucius spent his childhood, completely alone in this cruel world. One day, the Duke announced that Lucius would be his heir, but Cassius's subordinates did not approve of their master's decision. They assured the Duke that he should choose a duchess who would bear him a legitimate heir. No one understood how an illegitimate child could become the heir to the ducal family. One of the brave men tried to convince the Duke of his opinion. He also assured Cassius that when he had a legitimate heir, he would immediately change his mind. The Duke did not want to listen to the opinions of those around him and ordered everyone to be silent. He firmly told everyone that this was his decision, and no one dared to question it. Otherwise, they would lose their heads. Fear gripped the men, and the subordinates no longer dared to contradict the Grand Duke. Then the Lord raised his head and shouted loudly for everyone to leave. He did not want to see anyone at that moment. Suddenly, the Lord opened the door to his office and saw the boy running away. It occurred to him that Lucius had witnessed the heated conversation. He felt sorry that the child had overheard such talk. Meanwhile, the young women were gossiping that the young gentleman's mother was an ordinary woman, if not worse. One young lady claimed that knowing the Duke, he would even marry a noblewoman who had fallen from grace. But the fact that Duke Cassius had only accepted the child meant that the boy's mother was even lower in status than a commoner. One of the women assured that if she were in the boy's mother's place, she would send the child to a boarding school. Another young lady added that if she were the Duke's wife, the child would have been sent to a monastery long ago. Unfortunately, Lucius himself heard all the dirty gossip. The child's heart ached with pain. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. Lucius could not understand what he had done to these young ladies that they were discussing him so mercilessly. The boy dreamed of only one thing. Every evening, Lucius prayed for his mother to appear. The events took place at the estate of Count Barney. Ibelia got out of the carriage. The woman's head was filled with thoughts of the boy, Lucius. The young lady remembered how the child had cried. Ibelia reproached herself for not agreeing to have tea with the child. The woman understood that if she were not in Ibelia's body, she could have taken better care of Lucius. Ibelia pushed all thoughts away. She assured herself that she could only break off the engagement and live her own life. When the lady entered the mansion, she was met by her brother, who immediately asked where his sister was. Ibelia felt tired. She was also surprised by her brother's presence, as he was supposed to be away from the estate. But Derek asked his sister the same question again. He behaved quite arrogantly. The woman even thought that Derek had come all this way just to annoy her. In fact, Ibelia was also a victim. The woman's mother had once been a servant in the Barney household. She was beautiful, and one day the Count could not resist and spent the night with her. Shortly after the incident, Ibelia was born. Fearing that her child would be abused at the estate, the woman fled, but soon fell ill with the plague. Worried that she would be left alone, she decided to write a letter to the Count. However, upon receiving the letter, Count Barney wanted to kill the servant who had once fled and her child. But when he saw Ibelia, the Count noticed that the girl was very beautiful and resembled her mother. Then a brilliant idea came to the pitiful Count. He wanted to keep the girl for himself because she would be highly valued on the marriage market in the future. Then the self-confident Count called the child over for a talk. The Lord gave the girl a choice, to go with him or stay where she was. The man also promised that if Ibelia went with him, he would help her mother. Still very young and with no choice, Ibelia became a hostage on the estate. The second son, Derek, was particularly angry with Ibelia. That evening, the now grown-up Ibelia really wanted the day to pass quietly. But her brother grabbed her by the arm and thought that his sister had completely lost her mind because she simply ignored his questions. Ibelia always obeyed her brother, but not this time. The woman had nothing to say to Derek, so she asked him in a rather rude tone to let her pass. The young lady also added that she was quite tired. Derek was so shocked by his sister's unusual behavior that he stood rooted to the spot. Then the man decided that his sister had become so brave only because of her engagement to Duke Adelhart. An angry Derek believed that this did not change anything. But for the first time in her life, Ibelia decided to put her brother in his place. She reproached him that if she married the Duke, she would become one of the 3 duchesses of the empire. Then the woman laughed. This laughter could even be called hysterical. The lady repeated to her brother once again that she would become a duchess, and he would not even be able to get the title of count. The man's vision darkened, and he pushed Ibelia away with force. After a while, the woman came to her senses. She was lying on the bed. Ibelia also had a severe headache and assumed that she had fallen down the stairs. The woman's body ached unbearably, and every movement was painful. Annie was Ibelia's personal maid. The servant quietly told the woman that young Mr. Derek had pushed her down the stairs. The lady lowered her eyes, considering her brother an intolerable scoundrel. Annie gave Ibelia a painkiller. The maid also said that the doctor had recommended that the lady rest for a while. The young lady politely thanked the servant and was about to lie down. But Annie pulled a letter from the Adelharts out of her pocket and handed it to Ibelia. The woman was quite intrigued and hurried to open the letter and read its contents. After reading the first few lines, the woman was quite surprised, as the note was from little Lucius. The boy wrote that in order to invite someone over, one needed an invitation. Lucius said that this time he would ask for even more treats to be prepared for tea, and insisted that the young lady come, noting that he would be waiting for her eagerly. Abelia burst into tears. For a woman who grew up without a mother, the appearance of her stepmother was like a dream. Every day, as a girl, she dreamed that they would become a happy family. But all that was in the past. Once, in her past life, Abelia overheard a terrible conversation in which her stepmother asked her father to give her away to her relatives. The woman argued that she would soon have a second child and would not be able to take care of both of them. As an alternative, the stepmother suggested that her husband send his daughter to a boarding school, assuring him that the child would be well cared for there. So when Abelia read the letter, she understood the boy and how hurt he must have been. Still, the young lady did not want to give the boy false hope. She wrote a reply and asked her maid Annie to send the note to the Adelharts. The woman felt like a squeezed lemon and literally fell back into her chair. Abelia considered her brother abnormal. She clearly understood that he was simply mocking her. At first, the young lady intended to take revenge on Derek, and only then break off her engagement to Cassius. A plan had already formed in the woman's mind. Abelia understood well that even if she managed to break off the engagement, Count Barnine would not give up trying to marry her off to someone else. The young lady intended to run away from the Count as far as possible. To carry out her plan, the woman needed money, but even more important was to find an information guild. The next morning, Lucius received a letter from Lady Barnine. The boy was very happy. His nanny offered to help him read the letter, but Lucius refused because he wanted to do it himself. There was no trace of the child's good mood left. The boy looked down sadly because Lady Abelia had refused him, saying that she had no free time at all. The boy was in despair and turned his sad gaze to his nanny. After a short pause, Lucius asked his nanny if his father and Lady Abelia did not love him because of his origins. It even occurred to the poor boy that it was because of him that the young people had broken off their engagement. The nanny tried her best to comfort the child. The maid encouraged the boy, assuring him that the Duke loved him very much. Although Lucius was small, he did not want to give up. He wanted, no matter what it took, to somehow convince the young lady to take a step towards him and listen to him. The boy had a brilliant idea. He wanted to prepare a gift for Lady Abelia because he was convinced that everyone loved gifts. The nanny was very proud of how patient the boy was and how determined he was to achieve his goal. Abelia set off in search of the Information Guild. At this time, the young gentleman and his nanny were literally running to choose a gift for the lady. The woman heard a familiar voice. When she turned around, she saw a happy Lucius. Suddenly, the boy tripped over a pebble and fell. The lady's heart skipped a beat, but she tried to convince herself that she couldn't pay any attention to it because it could prevent her from moving forward. Abelia couldn't bring herself to move. She turned abruptly and ran to Lucius. Emotions overwhelmed the woman. She looked at the boy and asked if he was hurt. Lucius was very happy that the young lady had approached him. The woman thought the ground was too cold and asked the boy to get up. Abelia also thought that the child and his nanny should return to the residence for a checkup. Lucius jumped up. It seemed that all the pain had gone away. With tears in his eyes, the boy began to tell her that he had come to buy a gift for Abelia. The lady seemed very cold to the boy because she said that a gift was unnecessary in such a situation, as health was more important. Lucius really wanted to win the lady's attention, so he insisted that she go with him. Despite his fear and expected refusal, Lucius once again invited the lady to tea. The woman did not have time to come to her senses before she found herself at the festive table. The boy charmed Lady Barney so much that she did not even remember how she followed him. The woman claimed that she had no time for such things. Although she was indescribably pleased, she was glad that Lucius liked her because they were somehow similar. There were many delicacies on the table. The boy politely handed boxes and plates to the lady. The woman, in turn, thanked him, feeling embarrassed. Suddenly, Ibelia asked why the young gentleman had invited her to tea. Lucius looked at Ibelia with pity. That look was full of pleading and despair. The boy fidgeted for a long time, but gathering his strength, he asked directly if the woman would be his mother. Lucius immediately lowered his gaze because he was very afraid of rejection. It was not visible, but the boy nervously fidgeted with his fingers, waiting for a positive answer. Lady Barney's heart ached. It was very difficult for her, but she refused Lucius, saying that she could not be his mother. The boy did not understand why the lady was so categorical. His little heart was completely lonely, and he wanted warmth and love. It even occurred to the boy that Ibelia had rejected him because he was an illegitimate child. But that was not the case at all. Suddenly, Duke Cassius burst through the door and was alarmed by Lady Barnon's presence. The woman was ready for her husband's reaction, as it was typical of him. Cassius looked quite angry and did not understand why his son was alone with Ibelia. The reason why Ibelia could not be left alone with Lucius was a secret that had been forced upon the Duke by Count Barnin. The secret was that Lucius was not Cassius's biological child. The name Julia Adelhart could not be mentioned in the Adelhart estate. The woman was the eldest daughter of the late Duke Adelhart and Cassius's sister. When he was a child, the Duke was abused by his father under the pretext of preparing him to inherit the title. Julia was the only one who constantly supported Cassius. She was the only one he could call family. But over time, the brother and sister entered different academies. Cassius understood that the time had come for his sister Julia to escape from their father. One day, the Duke entered the room and saw his sister covered in blood. The frightened man could not comprehend what had happened. For the first time, the father had severely beaten his daughter. Julia was pregnant and did not know who the father of her child was. Cassius, who knew the truth, always protected Julia from her father. His sister was very grateful to her brother for protecting her and her son. But due to complications during childbirth, Julia died. Cassius was afraid of ridicule over his sister, who died giving birth to an illegitimate child, and took on the burden of condemnation from those around him. He accepted the boy as his own son. After that, the Duke set out to find the boy's biological father. The events took place a year ago at the Adelhart estate. Servants rushed to the Duke to inform him of a seizure that had occurred in Lucius. This was the first time this had happened to the boy. A strange symbol appeared on the child's chest, one that had never been there before. One doctor said that the boy did not simply have a fever, but was most likely cursed. The doctor explained that the young lord's congenital curse had only now manifested itself in the form of a symbol. The man claimed that it had been passed down through the family. Cassius began to wonder if he knew anyone else who had such a symbol on them. The Duke knew for sure that this symbol came from the boy's biological father, as there could be no other explanation. The man racked his brains day and night. Time passed, and it became increasingly difficult to find information about the curse. One day, Count Barney visited the Duke. Cassius was surprised by this meeting and asked why the man had come to see him. Unexpectedly for the Duke, the Count immediately said that it was about Lucius's biological parents. A chill ran down the Duke's spine. He even thought that his search would finally be over. He wanted to listen carefully to the Count, because perhaps the Count had the answer he had been looking for so long. Cassius, without showing any emotion, was indignant and retorted that Lucius was his biological son, as if he did not understand what the Count meant. But Barney knew the whole truth and immediately said that Lucius's biological mother was his sister, Julia. After these words, the Duke held his breath. Then the Count took a note out of his pocket and said that it contained information about Lucius's real father. The smiling Count Barney had a good offer for the Duke. He wanted the Duke to marry his daughter Ibelia. Under this condition, the man was ready to remain silent for the rest of his life. The Count also noted that if the Duke refused, he would reveal the secret to everyone. The Duke was overwhelmed with emotion. He was even ready to do whatever the Count wanted, just to find out the truth he had been waiting for so long. The man also did not want the secret he had hidden to become known to everyone. Meanwhile, Ibelia was having tea with Lucius. Since Lady Barney had asked the Duke to break off their relationship in exchange for information about the boy's real father, it was quite normal for the man to be wary of their meetings. Lucius immediately stood up and defended Ibelia. The boy explained that the woman had nothing to do with it, as he had invited her to visit himself. The angry Duke glanced sideways at his son and ordered him to return to his room. The boy wanted to argue with his father, but he was adamant. Ibelia asked Lucius to leave, as she wanted to talk to his father. The child felt a glimmer of hope for happiness and headed to his room, not feeling so sad anymore. Left alone with Cassius, the woman explained that she had accidentally met the young gentleman at the market and simply accepted his invitation to tea. Ibelia lowered her eyes, thinking she had ruined the Duke's mood. The woman even wanted to leave, but the Duke asked her to stay for a moment. The man grabbed Ibelia by the arm and suddenly saw the wounds on her. It occurred to Cassius that it was Count Barney who had mutilated the woman's body. Tears welled up in Lady Barney's eyes. She whispered that this was not the case. Then the Duke suggested that it was the work of the woman's brothers. Ibelia confidently said that it was nothing to worry about. Cassius was furious. He had not yet given his consent to break off the engagement, and his future wife had been beaten. The Duke looked intently at the woman and said sternly that he had every right to ask his fiancée questions. Ibelia explained that she only had scratches on her body from falling down the stairs and insisted that her husband let go of her hand. Cassius, in turn, decided to prepare a carriage for the woman. A few minutes later, the Duke asked his subordinate Logan to find out how Lady Ibelia was treated at the estate. The wounds the man saw looked as if the woman had been abused. Cassius did not want to admit it to himself, but Lady Barney aroused considerable sympathy in him, and he was not indifferent to her. The Duke remembered his childhood well and how his father had abused his daughter. Duke Adelhart fell into deep thought. He was very worried that his suspicions would turn out to be true. He couldn't allow himself to leave everything as it was and let things take their course. Ibelia got into the carriage and set off. After a while, the woman asked the driver to drop her off on Courtney Street. The man replied in a monotonous voice that his master had ordered him to take her to the Barney estate. Ibelia became agitated and said that she had one more thing to do. The carriage arrived at the place indicated by the lady. Getting out of the carriage, the woman headed for a tavern. Turning to the bartender, the young lady ordered an ascetic with lemon and ice. It was a cocktail that was popular in the Empire. However, in this tavern, ascetic was a secret code for the information guild Siero. The bartender looked at the woman with interest and asked if she knew the meaning of the phrase. Ibelia laughed and replied that she knew it very well. You had to knock twice on the table and ask for an ascetic with lemon and ice. It was a code that meant a request to meet with the leader of the Siero. Ibelia had come specifically to meet with the guild leader. 13 years later, after Cassius's death, Lucius learned the whole truth about his birth and decided that Cassius had betrayed him. The young man began to exchange information with the Sierra, establishing a close relationship with its leader, Samuel. Although this was enough to win Sierra's trust, the main reason for Ibelia's desire to hire them was the fact that they had to accept the guild's strict policy. The guild's policy was to exchange information for information. The woman used everything she knew and tried to convince Samuel of this. While the man treated Ibelia to a cup of tea, she waited for the guild leader. The lady noticed a strange smell coming from the man. It was something that was difficult for anyone to obtain, regardless of wealth. It was the soothing scent of lyser herbs. The gentleman asked the woman what she did for a living. Ibelia grabbed the man's arm tightly and asked if there was a reason to continue waiting. The lady knew very well that she was standing before Samuel himself, the leader of the Sierra. The man was surprised because he had no idea where the woman had gotten such information. Ibelia explained that there were rumors that Sir Samuel's younger sister was very ill, so she constantly burned lizery herbs, which acted as a sedative. The woman noted that the scent of those herbs was also coming from the man. Ibelia was also very observant and noticed an artifact on the man's index finger that allowed him to change his appearance. Pan was quite intrigued. What the lady told him was simply amazing. Samuel adjusted his ring and was convinced that the woman was indeed worthy of his attention. In an instant, the man transformed into his true self and asked the lady what she wanted. Ibelia really wanted the generous gentleman to lend her his artifact, and she also asked him to help her find a woman who worked as a doctor. The young lady described the woman's appearance, pointing out her red hair and green eyes. Ibelia noted that the woman had developed medicine for Samuel's sister and that her name was Erin Launer. The man scratched the back of his head. He wanted to know what payment the lady would offer. Lady Barney handed the man a bag of coins. It was enough to cover the cost of finding a doctor. The woman immediately warned that she planned to continue working with Sierra in the future. In return for the information, Ibelia was willing to tell the man how to cure his sister. Since Aria's birth, her family had been unable to find any medicine. The man could not understand how the woman knew how to solve the problem. The book was called Aria of Light. Samuel's younger sister, Aria, was the main character. She was very fragile, but kind. Lucius, who grew up completely distrustful of people after the betrayal of Ibelia and Cassius, was enchanted by Aria's kindness. A powerful divine force engulfing her was the only light capable of healing Lucius's curse. The woman advised Samuel to boil a syrup from the talon flower for his sister. This plant grew in the kingdom of Sesha and helped restore strength. Samuel could not understand why he should trust Ibelia. Until someone verified the information about the talon flower, he could not offer the woman any further details. Ibelia pointed out that it was in their best interest to find a doctor as soon as possible. Lady Barnin understood that if she helped Irina develop a cure for Aria, it would greatly facilitate the conclusion of the agreement with Samuel. Ibelia hurried home as it was already time for dinner. She sighed with relief that she had not been caught. When the woman approached the table, the Count was angry that she was late. The young lady froze for a moment because the Count looked more cruel than she had expected. The man could not understand where Ibelia was looking so intently. The Count had information that Ibelia had been visiting the Adelhart estate without his knowledge. Lying would have been the better choice, but the young lady decided to tell the truth, even though she was a little afraid of her rather strict father's reaction. Taking a deep breath, the young lady confessed that she had asked the Duke to break off the engagement. Hearing this, the Count became extremely angry. Nevertheless, Ibelia smiled and said that she had planned to tell him everything soon. This turn of events was not part of the Count's plan. He could not allow some illegitimate child to dictate terms to him. It was his decision, and he did not want anyone to interfere. Unable to restrain himself, the Count rose from the table. He approached Ibelia and struck her violently across the face. When his daughter fell, the furious man behaved like a beast and continued to beat her. When the Count had calmed down a little, he told Ibelia in a commanding tone not to test his patience. He promised to talk to the Duke in the near future and said he didn't even want to hear about breaking off the engagement. The woman, who had barely gotten up, feeling intense pain, sat down in her place. She remained silent. Meanwhile, her brother looked condescendingly at his sister and remarked that she had completely lost her mind. Instead of words of sympathy and support, the brother, like his father, humiliated Ibelia. He noted that the lady had been talking nonsense lately. The brother ordered his sister to stop interfering in family affairs and to stay out of their sight. Ibelia expected Derek to apologize, but it seemed that he had no intention of doing so. The brother looked at his sister angrily and began to shout that he would never apologize to her. The man had the opportunity to apologize, but he did not do so. For this reason, Ibelia spilled the potion next to her brother. Shortly before that, the woman had explained to Samuel that she wanted to push someone down the stairs. The sister wanted to hurt her brother just a little. Samuel was surprised by such a strange desire because of all the requests they had received. This was the most restrained. Nevertheless, Ibelia believed that the prospect of hurting someone was quite difficult. Then Samuel smiled and handed the woman the jar of potion. The woman quickly grabbed the enchanted water and wanted to leave the guild as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Logan brought Cassius the results of his investigation. The man said that although the Count played to the public, showing concern for Lady Barnine, in reality, he often neglected her at the estate. Logan also added that even the Countess mocked the woman. She used lessons as an excuse for starvation and other restrictions. The Duke was interested in physical violence. Logan was sure that this was not the case, but the Duke was convinced of the opposite. The man began to wonder where the woman got the wounds on her hands if they were not signs of violence. Cassius decided to visit the Barnine estate immediately. Logan could not understand why the Duke wanted to do this, but the Lord wanted to check something. Duke Cassius set off on his journey. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if the woman openly admitted that she had been abused. The Lord bowed his head and admitted to himself that he had given in to his emotions without thinking. Cassius did not recognize himself. He was afraid to admit to himself that he had tender feelings for Ibelia. The man lost his head around the woman and could not allow anyone to hurt her. Soon, the Duke arrived at the Count's estate, but the Lord was immediately restrained by servants. The butler even mentioned that Lady Ibelia was feeling unwell and asked him to visit her another time. The Duke was surprised and suspected something was wrong because just a day ago, she had looked perfectly healthy. Cassius looked sternly at the man and said firmly that he wanted to see the lady immediately. Meanwhile, unaware of anything, Ibelia sat in her room in front of the mirror, examining her battered face. Suddenly, a maid entered the room and reported that young Mr. Derek had fallen down the stairs. Ibelia looked surprised and immediately asked about her brother's well-being. Although, in reality, she couldn't care less about how Derek was feeling. Nevertheless, she was curious to find out how her husband had injured himself. The flustered maid said that Derek had broken his leg. She was very concerned that the lady had fallen first, followed by the gentleman. Ibelia shrugged silently. In fact, she was gloating because she thought her brother had gotten what he deserved. Ibelia felt happy because she had isolated herself from Derek for a while. When the maid left, Ibelia literally fell onto the bed. The woman felt good and pleasant. Then the young lady decided to rest, pretending to be ill. But as soon as she lay down, someone knocked on the door. The woman reluctantly got up and allowed the visitor to enter. The worried servant informed the lady that a guest had arrived for her. Ibelia was quite surprised that the maid was acting so flustered over an ordinary guest. The servant said that the guest was Duke Adelhart. Ibelia was surprised because the man had come without warning. It even occurred to the woman that Cassius had come to give her an answer to her proposal to break off their engagement. The lady did not understand how she could meet the Duke looking the way she did. She asked the maid to tell Cassis that she was not feeling well and to ask him to come back another time. Ibelia lay down quietly in bed, but after a while, Annie's maid came back to her mistress and said that the Duke wanted to see her immediately, no matter what. Cassius was already waiting for Ibelia in the hall. The lady asked Annie to help her get ready. The maid quickly picked out some clothes for her mistress, combed her hair, and touched up her makeup. When it came to the wounded cheek, the servant felt helpless. Annie explained that the bruise would still be visible. The maid was very worried about the Duke's reaction. Ibelia quickly found a way out of the situation. She asked the maid to bring the largest hat in the mansion. When the lady was ready, she went to meet the Duke. On the way, Ibelia met the butler, who asked her to return to her room. But the woman explained that Duke Adelhart was waiting for her in the hall. As it turned out, the Countess had already spoken with Cassius. Ibelia was surprised that the woman had gone to speak with the Duke herself. The lady raised her head proudly and declared that she had no intention of returning. The lady told the butler that His Highness should not be kept waiting too long and walked to the hall. Meanwhile, the woman could already hear the conversation between the Countess and the Duke. The Countess tried to convince Cassius that Ibelia was not feeling well that day and asked him to come another time. The lady understood that the Countess wanted to preserve her reputation. It occurred to the woman that if she destroyed the image of the generous woman that the Countess had built, it would be interesting to see the expression on the Duke's face. Suddenly, Ibelia approached the Countess and the Duke. The woman barely restrained herself from rage and had no idea why the damned lady had come to them. Cassis immediately asked the lady why she had taken so long. Ibelia explained that she needed to tidy herself up first, as the gentleman's visit had been rather sudden. Cassis was surprised to see Ibelia at home wearing a huge hat. The man approached the woman and took off her headdress. The Duke was horrified to see a fresh wound on the woman's face. Cassius asked anxiously if it was also a wound from the fall. The Countess, meanwhile, nervously shaking her fan, noted that Ibelia was sometimes clumsy. The Duke asked Mrs. Barning to speak for herself. Cassius immediately suspected that it was a mark from a blow. Ibelia was surprised that the man was so angry about it. The Duke gently took Ibelia's face in his hands and determined that someone had struck her. The man was overcome with rage. He could not understand who would dare to raise a hand against his fiancée. Cassis's face changed instantly, and his gaze became fierce. The angry Duke's gaze fell on the Countess. The woman immediately explained that she had nothing to do with the lady's injury. Meanwhile, Ibelia tried to calm Cassius down and said that her injury was not that serious. The Duke sternly declared that he would not allow his future bride to be in such a place. The man announced that from that day on, the lady would live on his estate. Cassius grabbed Ibelia by the arm and led her to the carriage. The distraught lady demanded an explanation from her husband. Duke Adelhart looked at her with loving eyes, but she did not notice. The Duke was surprised that Ibelia asked for the engagement to be broken off instead of asking for help, since she had been treated terribly at home. The proud lady said that it did not matter how she was treated. Lady Barning added that there was no need to worry about her. It seemed to the Duke that the woman was saying this so that he would break off the engagement. Cassius did not like the tone in which Ibelia spoke to him. The man explained to the woman that since they were engaged, she belonged to him. Suddenly, the Duke abruptly changed his mind about breaking off the relationship. Ibelia did not understand her husband's train of thought at all. He himself did not want to marry her, and for some reason, he changed his mind. The Duke did not intend to force the lady into anything, but asked her to at least stay at his estate for a while. Ibelia asked why he was so concerned about her. The Duke believed that anyone in his place would have done the same, seeing what the Barney family had done to her. Cassius also could not send his fiancée away. In his opinion, it was best for her to live at his estate. When the carriage arrived at Adelhart's estate, the young couple was immediately met by Frank Odello, the estate manager. The man kindly introduced himself and was happy to welcome the lady to the residence. The Duke immediately informed the butler that Ibelia would be staying with them for a while. He also asked Frank to make sure that the woman felt comfortable. Then the man asked the lady to go to her new room. While the young lady was looking around her room, the Adelhart family doctor arrived to examine her wounds. Ibelia thought this was unnecessary, but since it was the Duke's order, she did not dare to argue. The doctor disinfected the lady's wounds and applied bandages. He also asked if the young lady had any other complaints. Ibelia smiled and replied that everything was fine. The doctor asked her to contact him if she had any questions. Lady Barnane thanked him sincerely. Sitting on the bed, the woman did not know what to do. She had no idea what kind of world surrounded her, so she decided that it was dangerous to run away. At first, the lady decided to come up with a plan. She wanted to earn money by working with Samuel and leave the Barney estate, but there was no hope for that anymore. The young lady thought deeply. She did not know if Lucius would be able to find a good mother if she left. There was also the unresolved issue of an heir. The woman also wanted to make sure that Lucius's curse would be lifted. Ibelia felt that these reasons were not enough for an unmarried woman to remain in a mansion where only a man and a child lived. The young lady's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. The woman allowed the visitor to enter. Lucius was standing before her. The boy immediately ran up to the young lady and asked what had happened to her cheek. Ibelia reassured the child, saying that everything was fine. The woman also asked why the boy had come. Lucius was going for a walk and wanted Lady Barnane to accompany him. Ibelia laughed and gladly agreed to keep the child company. Without waiting for the right moment, they went outside. It was a beautiful, sunny day. There were many plants growing near the estate. Ibelia was delighted when she saw the clover. At first, the boy did not understand what was so special about the ordinary grass. Ibelia explained that clover usually had 3 leaves, but this one had 4. Sometimes this happened. It was said that if you found such a leaf, your wish would come true. Lucius immediately became curious to know if Lady Ibelia had ever found a 4-leaf clover. The woman admitted that this was her first time, although she had tried to find one when she was a child. The boy became very curious about what Lady Barnane's wish was. The woman smiled and was about to say something, but suddenly the maid called the young master and lady to dinner. It was already getting dark outside, so Ibelia suggested that Lucius go inside. There were many delicious dishes on the table. The Duke noticed that his bride had not eaten anything. It occurred to him that the woman did not like anything. Ibelia explained that everything looked very tasty, but she had no appetite at all. Lucius asked his father with interest if Lady Ibelia would stay to live at their estate. Not wanting to give his son false hope, the Duke immediately said that the question had not yet been decided, but noted that the woman would definitely be staying with them for some time. The boy instantly remembered the clover. He wanted to find a 4-leaf plant right away to make a wish. Ibelia thought for a moment and regretted telling Lucius about it. The woman looked tenderly at the boy and explained to him that it was all just a fairy tale and that such a rare clover did not actually grant wishes. She even asked Lucius to promise her that he would not look for the clover. After dinner, Ibelia looked out the window. It was raining quite heavily outside. Looking closely, she noticed someone walking in the garden in such gloomy, damp, and rainy weather. When the lady looked closer, she saw Lucius there. Ibelia rushed outside, but for some reason, the boy was lying on the ground. The woman emotionally began to shake the boy and asked him to get up immediately. The woman deeply regretted telling the child the story about the clover in the heat of the moment. She just wanted to keep the conversation going and interest the boy, but instead, he believed it. Lucius looked intently at the woman and handed her the clover, which had 4 leaves. The boy looked incredibly happy. The woman took the boy home because he looked unwell. Ibelia blamed herself because the boy had a high fever. The doctor gave him some medicine to bring his temperature down. The Duke, in turn, asked the woman to return to her room, but the lady stubbornly wanted to stay with Lucius. She looked at the Duke with a pleading look. The man, of course, agreed. When the boy opened his eyes, he thought that his nanny was next to him. Ibelia whispered that it was her. The woman gently covered the boy and wished him a good night. But Lucius did not want to sleep at all and began to fidget. Then the lady handed Lucius the clover because that was what he was looking for. A smile appeared on the child's face. The boy was glad that he had not lost the plant. Ibelia looked sadly at Lucius and assured him that it was just a plant and that it did not grant any wishes. The young man remembered well the lady's story about how she once wanted to find a rare plant. It turned out that Lucius wanted to find clover to give to Ibelia. The woman's heart ached. She was struck by the child's kindness. The boy asked the lady to make a wish. Meanwhile, Ibelia did not understand what she had done. The woman was convinced that she did not deserve such a gift and was not worthy of love. Ibelia asked the boy why he had given her the clover. The young man simply wanted the lady's wish to be granted. In fact, the woman really wanted to find a family. She herself did not know until the end whether she had an urgent need for love. The lady gently and lovingly stroked the boy's head. There was only one way to fulfill her and Lucius's wish. The woman thought deeply and made a final decision. A few minutes later, Ibelia was already in the Duke's office. The man was intrigued by the woman's late visit and immediately asked what had brought her there. The lady wanted to talk about their wedding. She looked up at the man and said firmly that she agreed to marry him. Ibelia had only one condition. In exchange for information about Lucius's father, the lady wanted to sign an agreement not with her father, but with her directly. The Duke was surprised and asked why the woman had changed her mind. Ibelia looked intently at Cassius and confessed that it was because of Lucius. The Duke could not understand what the boy had done, but it was a secret known only to the lady and the young gentleman. But it wasn't that simple. The woman immediately warned the Duke that as soon as he was sure the information was true, she would want to divorce him. The lady reminded Cassius that she had never intended to marry him in the first place. The woman decided to agree to this marriage only for Lucius's sake and on the conditions set by the man. Ibelia thought it through well. Cassius would remove the curse from the boy, and she would bring Arya to heal him completely. It would take 3 years. Lady Barnine said that during this time, she would be able to remove the curse from Lucius, and she would be able to prepare for an independent life. Cassius looked at the woman and desperately asked if he was so repulsive to her. Ibelia explained to the man that it was not a matter of beauty or ugliness. The woman simply wanted to marry for love. The Duke had tender feelings for the lady, but could not confess them to her. Cassius asked where Ibelia would go after their possible divorce. The woman replied modestly that she would think about it later. The lady looked intently at the Duke and waited for his answer regarding the divorce. The Duke did not want to let such a beautiful woman go just like that and said that he needed time to think. But he immediately agreed to sign a contract with Ibelia because he did not want to have anything to do with Count Barney. Ibelia insisted that they sign the agreement as soon as possible. Cassius explained that his assistant would prepare all the necessary papers. The man wanted to postpone the conversation about divorce. The lady kindly asked the count to pay as much attention to Lucius as possible, at least while they were married. Cassius tried to assure Ibelia that he already spent enough time with his son, but Ibelia did not think so. The woman looked intently at her husband and pointed out that when the boy was sick, Cassius sat in his office all day, sorting through documents. The Duke tried to come up with excuses. He argued that the doctor had asked the boy to rest more. Cassius also added that Lucius would not recover any faster if he sat next to him. Ibelia tried in every way to convince the Duke otherwise. The woman even offered her help. She wanted to teach Cassius how to give the boy his attention and love properly. Smiling, Lady Barnine suggested that Duke Cassius put all his papers aside and go to the boy's room. Ibelia was convinced that Cassius was so worried about his son that he couldn't concentrate on his work. She could see that the man didn't know how to express his emotions and feelings for his child. Meanwhile, the Duke leaned back in his chair and immersed himself in his thoughts. He believed that he had acted impulsively when he saw the woman's wounds. After thinking it over, Cassius came to the conclusion that it would be better for him and the lady to part ways when the time came. However, the man was haunted by various thoughts. His feelings for Lady Barnane were strong, but he could see that she was indifferent to him. The Duke could not understand why he was so concerned about the future of a woman with whom he had no ties yet. When the Duke entered his son's room, the maid asked him to be quiet because Lucius was asleep. The boy had been waiting eagerly for his father, but had fallen asleep. The servant decided to leave the father and son alone. The man gazed fondly at the boy and took his delicate hand. Cassius immediately remembered that it was then that he last held his sister's hand. Also on that day, the Duke swore to Julia that he would protect her child if she died. The man was sure that he had kept his promise. But at the same time, Cassius could not understand why the boy was afraid of him. It occurred to him that it was because they were father and son. Cassius did not understand why Lady Ibelia spoke as if he had done something wrong. Suddenly, Lucius woke up. The boy did not expect to see his father next to him, as he was always busy. A sincere and joyful smile appeared on the child's face. At first, Cassius couldn't understand why his son was smiling so happily. The boy said that he was happy to see his father next to him. The Duke couldn't stop wondering how one could be so happy that his father had simply come to see him. The man hadn't even had time to do anything for his son, but he was indescribably happy. Cassius patted the young man and asked him to go to bed, as it was already quite late. When the Duke saw Lucius's smile, he got goosebumps. The man couldn't understand what was happening to him. Early in the morning, Cassius called Ibelia to sign the documents. The woman read everything carefully. She was surprised that there was no clause about divorce in the agreement. They agreed to discuss it later, but there was no such clause at all. The Duke wanted to reassure his wife, saying that they had decided to discuss the issue later, which was why he had not included it in the contract. Ibelia was outraged, as she was convinced that her husband should have included this clause. Cassius immediately called his assistant to advise him on how to proceed. Ibelia immediately asked that a clause on divorce be included in the contract and that it be specified that it would be discussed later. The Duke was flustered, but still ordered his assistant to do everything as the lady requested. Ibelia also explained that she had left her maid Annie at the Earl of Barnane's estate and asked that she be transferred to Adelhart's house. It would take at least 3 months to prepare for the wedding. The servant promised Lady Barnine that they would do everything the woman asked during that time. The assistant also asked the lady if she had any wishes. The woman asked for a modest wedding. The servant noted that this would be difficult, as they would have to take care of the Adelhart family's reputation. Ibelia waved her hand, not wanting to interfere, and allowed the Duke to do as he saw fit. Cassis's assistant thanked the woman for her understanding and left. When the man left, the Duke cast a spell of silence so that no one could hear them. A very mysterious moment arrived, and the woman had to tell the Duke who Lucius's real father was. After a short pause, Ibelia revealed the secret to the Duke. The boy's father was Prince Lionel of the magical kingdom of Sesia. Cassis's eyes widened, and he asked the lady if this was really true. The Duke's reaction was understandable, as in the original book, Lionel was a womanizer. The man was the illegitimate son of the king of Sesia. Whether because of his resemblance to his father or because of an inferiority complex, he constantly got into trouble, and the king was extremely dissatisfied with this. That is why the king of Sesia decided to send his son to study at a magic academy. And there, the young man met Julia, Cassis's sister. Lionel was very kind to Julia and valued her. Despite this, he hid their relationship, fearing that other people would start harassing the young lady and hurt her. Lionel understood perfectly well that he was the king's illegitimate son and would not be able to protect the young lady from sharp tongues and evil people. The only person who knew about the lover's secret was Count Barney, but that turned out not to be the biggest problem. Lionel was cursed by the royal family of Sesia, and this curse was passed on to Lucius. The biggest mystery of the original novel was that Lionel, upon learning of Julia's pregnancy, went to Sesia to obtain permission to marry her, but never returned. Lionel was madly in love with Julia, and Ibelia couldn't understand why he didn't come back. The woman regretted not finishing the novel. Hearing this news, the Duke was quite surprised. The man wanted to be alone because he needed to find out as much as possible about all this. Meanwhile, Ibelia decided to visit Lucius. The woman felt happy because she knew that she could give the boy the happiness he had dreamed of. On the way, the young lady met a maid carrying food for Lucius. The woman wanted to take the tray to the boy's room herself. When Ibelia entered the room, she immediately asked how the young man was feeling. Lucius was very happy to see the young lady and ran to meet her. Assuming that the boy was hungry, the woman offered him something to eat. The young man asked Ibelia to join him. The young lady refused, saying that the chef had prepared the meal especially for the boy. Ibelia asked Lucius to eat everything himself, because then he would recover faster and grow up to be big and strong. Ibelia described everything so interestingly that it occurred to the boy that if he ate the whole portion, he would become as tall as his father. The lady realized that the boy had become closer to Cassius than she had thought. The woman laughed and confirmed that if Lucius ate everything, he would certainly grow up to be tall and strong like his father. The boy wanted so much to be like his father that he immediately began to literally sweep everything off his plate. The lady asked Lucius to slow down a little, telling him that he shouldn't eat so fast. Suddenly, the boy took out a book, saying that he had a gift for the woman. The young man opened the book and took out a 4-leaf clover. The woman laughed and said that her wish had already come true and asked the young man to make his own wish. The boy whispered quietly that he had one wish, which was for Ibelia to become his mother. The child was very afraid that the woman would refuse. But to Lucius's great surprise, the young lady nodded affirmatively. The lady laughed and said that she would become Lucius's mother. The boy couldn't believe what he had heard, and tears of joy rolled down his cheeks. The young man promised that he would try his best to be good, stop being capricious, and study diligently. Ibelia approached Lucius and hugged him tenderly. She believed that the boy deserved love just because he was who he was. The young lady wanted the boy to be himself and do what made him happy. Lucius immediately asked the woman how she felt and if she was happy to be his mother. Ibelia hugged the boy even tighter and said that she was always happy when she was with him. Meanwhile, Duke Cassius thought about Lucius's biological father, Lionel Cessia. He remembered his last conversation with Julia. At that time, Cassius had tried to find out who the father of her child was. But the woman was not ready to reveal the man's name until everything was settled. Julia convinced her brother that her lover had promised to return after he received permission to marry. Julia immediately admitted that her lover's family would most likely be against their marriage. Cassis was furious because he couldn't understand how a family could forbid their son from marrying Duchess Adelhart. The Duke then began to ask his sister if her husband knew about her pregnancy. Julia confessed that this was why he had left for his homeland. The woman dreamily said that she wanted to name her daughter Lucia, and if it was a boy, Lucius. The Duke immediately noticed that his sister loved her beloved very much because she spoke of him with such warmth and tenderness. It was then that the woman asked Cassius to take care of her child until her future husband returned. The Duke returned to reality. He could not have imagined that Lucius's father was the prince of the magical kingdom of Cessia. It was the same prince who was rumored to be the royal family's headache. Duke Cassius couldn't understand how that scoundrel dared to seduce his sister and then disappear. Without wasting any time, he called Logan and asked him to gather all the information he could about the royal family of Cessia and Prince Lionel. The Duke also asked him to find out if Count Barnine and the royal family of Cessia were connected in any way. Logan planned to prepare a letter for Count Barnine with the information and then deal with the lady's demands. Cassius went into a dark room and took out one of the books. It had been 7 years since he and his sister had last seen each other. The man stood next to Julia's portrait and spoke to her as if she were alive. The Duke told his sister that he had recently met a woman. Cassius also added that the lady, like Julia, always hid her feelings and pain. Every time Ibelia tried to hide something from the Duke, he felt his own world, which he had so carefully protected, crumbling. It was just an old, healed scar. Cassius couldn't understand why Ibelia had burst into his life so abruptly. He noticed how sincerely and cheerfully she laughed, even though she had been through so much. Suddenly, Lucius looked into the open room for the first time. The boy saw something strange and came closer. When the young man picked up the bright red fabric, he saw a portrait of a woman. Meanwhile, Ibelia and Lucius were playing hide and seek. The woman went to look for the young man, but she walked around and called him for quite a long time. The little rascal hid quite skillfully and was glad that the lady couldn't find him. Suddenly, Ibelia saw the boy, but she still pretended that she had no idea where he was hiding. The woman walked very close and lifted books, pillows, and various other things, as if looking for a child. Suddenly, the lady looked into the boy's hiding place. Lucius was upset because he thought he had hidden well enough. He decided to look for a new hiding place. The young man looked around, wondering where to hide. The boy looked again into the mysterious room, which was open. Going inside, Lucius saw a book with a string hanging from it. Later, Ibelia and Lucius gathered for a meal. The lady suggested that the boy take a walk in the garden after lunch, but the young man refused because he intended to go somewhere else. At first, the woman did not pay attention to the child's words, but she still asked him, laughing, if it was a place with treasures. Lucius hastened to share that there was a room in the house with a portrait of an angel. The woman was surprised. The boy was eager to show Ibelia the portrait he had found. After lunch, they both went to the mysterious room. The woman had no idea what Lucius wanted to show her. When the boy removed the red cloth from the portrait, the lady was speechless. Standing before her was a painting of Julia Adelhart. Lady Ibelia had a bad feeling and asked Lucius to leave the room as quickly as possible. The woman understood that if Cassius found them there, it would not end well. The lady said in a trembling voice that they had already seen the angel and it was time to return. The boy looked at the woman hopefully and asked if his mother was as beautiful as she was. Ibelia's heart almost jumped out of her chest. She had no right to tell the child anything. The woman just lowered her eyes and asked the boy if he missed his mother. Suddenly, Duke Cassis entered the room. He was not very happy to see his son and future bride in the room he had kept hidden from prying eyes. The man's dissatisfied gaze shifted to the lady. His son tried to explain to his father that he had found the room himself and wanted to show Lady Ibelia something. Lucius begged the Duke not to scold the woman, confirming his guilt. The man sternly ordered his son not to enter that room again. The boy lowered his head and promised his father that it was the last time. It was late in the evening and time to go to bed. Ibelia wanted to read a book to the boy, but it seemed that the young man was not in the mood for that. Lucius anxiously asked Lady Ibelia if his father was very angry with him. The woman noticed that the boy was very worried about Cassius. She wanted to calm him down, saying that his father wasn't angry at all. Lucius covered his nose and mouth with a blanket and said that his father's voice had been quite scary. Even Ibelia was a little frightened by the Duke's tone. When he was angry, he looked very stern and fierce. But the man's anger was directed at himself. The lady understood well that Cassius had failed to save his sister, and he felt guilty towards Lucius. The woman noted that the Duke was not angry, but simply quite tired, as he had been working very hard lately. Ibelia wanted to change the subject and comfort the child a little. The woman suggested that the boy listen to a story about a knight. The young man wanted this very much, because according to his nanny, his father was capable of defeating even a dragon. Lucius and Ibelia talked sweetly. It was not surprising that the boy wanted to be as strong and powerful as his father. The woman laughed and asked if the boy would like to fight dragons in the future. The lady meant it as a joke, but Lucius took her words too seriously and said that dragons were very scary. The young man's expression even changed, but Lucius laughed and said that he wasn't afraid of anything. The boy also added that when he became a knight, he wanted to protect Lady Ibelia. The young man promised to eat well so that he would grow up quickly. The woman looked at the child with warmth. The boy was so sincere, gentle, and open. He was not afraid of his desires. In his eyes, one could see the strength that he would use wisely in the future. Lucius told Ibelia that if an evil dragon ever tried to kidnap her, he would chase it away himself. Tears rolled down the lady's cheeks. They were tears of joy. She was happy to see such a strong young man by her side. Lucius was saddened by the woman's tears, thinking he had offended her in some way. The woman reassured the boy, for she was very happy and touched. In the morning, at breakfast, Lucius noticed his father's stern gaze. It occurred to him that the Duke was angry with him, after all. Ibelia asked the boy to calm down, saying that her husband was busy. In fact, Ibelia noticed that the Duke seemed to be deliberately avoiding Lucius, and she could not understand why he was behaving this way. The woman regretted that there was not more information about Cassius in the original story. In the original novel, Aria of Light, the story began after Lucius had already inherited the title of Duke. But by that time, Cassius had already died. Ibelia only knew that Lucius considered him a strict father, and she also felt that he disliked Ibelia. The lady did not know why Cassius avoided Lucius, but she could not sit idly by. The woman decided to visit the Duke's office. The man was surprised by such a late visit. Ibelia explained that she wanted to talk about yesterday's events, but the Lord had no intention of discussing it. Ibelia told her husband that Lucius was very upset. The Duke looked at the woman intently and thought she shouldn't worry. The lady did not like her husband's response at all. She pointed out that when they signed the agreement, she had asked the Duke to spend more time with their child. Cassius replied sharply that it was different. And then the woman saw nothing but fear in her husband's eyes. Duke Cassius was afraid that the secret of Lucius's origins would be revealed. But the woman understood that her husband could not run away from the truth forever. Ibelia approached Cassius and assured him that the boy wanted to know more about his mother. Sooner or later, the child would have to hear the truth. The Duke did not understand what the woman meant. Ibelia wanted Cassius to tell his son the whole truth. But the man was categorically against it and wanted everything to remain a secret. The lady tried to make her husband understand that nothing lasts forever in this world, not even secrets. Ibelia had read the original story, so she knew very well that Lucius would learn the whole truth after Cassius's death. The woman was very afraid that the boy would be angry in the future that the man he considered his father was not really his father. Unfortunately, Lucius, being an adult man, felt hurt and angry and began to doubt Cassius's love when he learned the truth. And Cassius could no longer explain anything to him. Ibelia really wanted Lucius to learn the whole truth from Duke Cassius himself, not from other people. The Duke seemed angry, considering the boy his son. Despite his tender feelings for the woman, he seemed harsh and angry. The man was completely unable to show his emotions or express his true feelings. He asked her not to interfere in his affairs because he wanted to sort everything out himself, since it had nothing to do with the agreement. Ibelia firmly believed that it was illogical to hide information about his mother from the boy. The woman convinced the Duke that in order not to arouse suspicion, it would be better to tell him at least something. Cassius was getting annoyed by the conversation. He couldn't understand why the woman was so concerned about something that was none of her business. Ibelia looked intently at Cassius and confessed that she was also an illegitimate child. The woman told the man about her feelings because she knew what it was like to grow up without a mother. The lady wanted to do everything in her power to make Lucius happy. Duke Cassius was deep in thought. He remembered holding the boy in his arms when he was just a baby. The man was very happy then and announced the baby's name to everyone. After hearing the young lady's words, the Duke realized that the boy craved his love. It seemed to him that he had never lived up to the young man's expectations, and he even began to doubt whether he was worthy of calling him his son. After thinking about the child's feelings, Cassius was not sure that he had the right to deprive the boy of the opportunity to find out who his mother really was, who loved him sincerely. The words of Ibelia, who insisted that Lucius must one day learn the truth, swirled in the Duke's head. The man sighed and admitted that he was wrong. However, Cassius was afraid that his son would never forgive him for hiding the truth about his real parents. Tired, Cassius went to bed. The man dreamed of past events related to his sister. The Duke then came to his father with complaints because he saw wounds on Julia's hands. The Duke immediately suspected his father of raising his hand against Julia. The man then said that he was just disciplining his daughter because she had behaved badly, as usual. Cassius loved his sister very much and could not allow anyone, not even his father, to hurt her. A dispute arose between the men. Cassius threatened his father, telling him not to raise his hand against Julia again. The Duke did not want to stand by silently. Sometime after those events, Cassius went to the room where Lucius was. The nanny was rocking the baby, who was crying loudly. Then the woman complained to her husband that the baby couldn't calm down. The Duke took the baby in his arms and began to rock him. It was the first time the man had held the boy. Suddenly, The child stopped crying and smiled at the man. It was then that the Duke gave the boy his name. Since Lucius was Julia's son, for whom she had given her life, the Duke was convinced that the boy should have everything that the members of the Adelhart family had. At that moment, as Duke Cassius held the baby in his arms, it occurred to him that Lucius could not appear in this world as Julia's son. After thinking it through, the man found a way out of the situation. Cassius wanted to declare the baby his son. His father was very angry with Cassius and even raised his hand against him. But the skilled man managed to grab his father's hand and prevent him from striking him. Cassius insisted that his father remember his words, which were that he considered Lucius his son. The man also wanted to make the boy his heir. When the Duke woke up, he immediately realized that he had done this to protect Lucius. Cassius was very concerned that Ibelia considered him wrong and constantly interfered. But the Duke finally noticed that Ibelia was looking at him with such a joyful smile that he wanted very much to protect her. Cassius's heart began to beat faster. The man asked the lady if she could spare him a few moments. Ibelia was surprised by this request and thought that the Duke had not slept well, as his eyes were quite red. The young people went into the same mysterious room. They approached Julia's portrait. The man looked tenderly at Ibelia and explained to her that he was not yet ready to tell the boy about his mother. The Duke, on the contrary, wanted Lucius to never find out about it. The man suggested that Ibelia tell the boy that Julia was his aunt. The Duke asked her to tell Lucius that he could come to that room and look at the portrait of the woman for as long as he wanted. These were not the words the lady wanted to hear. She looked at Cassius and suggested that he tell the boy everything himself. Ibelia looked tenderly at Cassius and assured him that Lucius was waiting for his attention. The Duke listened to the lady and told his son everything himself. After a while, the happy boy grabbed Lady Ibelia by the hand and asked her to go with him to a mysterious room. Opening the portrait, Lucius proudly told the woman that this was his aunt. Lucius spoke so passionately about the woman looking at him from the portrait that Ibelia's heart ached. The boy happily announced that Julia looked like an angel. The woman laughed and confirmed that the young lady was very beautiful. Suddenly, a maid informed Ibelia that a guest had arrived, namely Countess Barnane. The lady did not wish to receive the woman and asked the servant to send her away. Ibelia also asked the servants never to allow that woman to enter. Countess Barnane was very stubborn and immediately warned that if the lady did not come out to her, she would not give her servant Annie back. Ibelia turned to the boy and explained that she had to leave for a short while. She promised to return quickly. The boy was sad and did not want the lady to leave. Ibelia promised Lucius that when she returned, they would definitely go for a walk in the garden and weave bracelets out of clover. The boy reluctantly agreed to wait. Meanwhile, Countess Barnane caused quite a commotion in the hall. The woman shouted at the butler and demanded that he call Ibelia immediately. The woman convinced her husband that she was Lady Barnane's mother. Hearing the conversation between the butler and the countess, Ibelia turned to the woman with dissatisfaction, as she did not consider her to be her mother at all. Lady Barnane asked the maid not to bring any treats. Countess Barnane felt that she had been treated terribly as a guest. Ibelia glanced at the woman from under her eyebrows and said proudly that rude women who burst in uninvited were not considered guests. The young lady did not want to listen to the countess's unnecessary remarks, so she immediately asked why she had come. As it turned out, the countess was outraged that she and the count had not even been invited to the wedding. Moreover, the woman was surprised that she and the count would not receive a dowry. The countess condescendingly asked if the lady wanted to show that she was breaking all ties with her family. To the woman's great surprise, this turned out to be true. The Countess indignantly began to yell at her daughter, accusing her of dishonesty, since it was the Count who had insisted on this marriage. Ibelia smiled, because in the end, she was the one who was engaged to the Duke. The lady noted that after the wedding, she would become a member of the Adelhart family, and saw no urgent need to maintain ties with the Barney family. The young lady also told the Countess to her face that she despised her for bearing the Barney name. Ibelia, on the contrary, asked the woman to rejoice that she would soon be free of that name. Ibelia had no intention of continuing the conversation with the Countess, so she said goodbye and left. The Countess was stunned. She began to shout ugly words after the lady,